Good evening, friends. Glad you're here tonight with us. Thanks for tuning in to the new podcast, Wounded Hearts, Wounded Churches. We discuss the following topics: sexual addiction, religious abuse, and religious disenfranchisement, other types of issues and church problems. This live platform offers counseling sessions, meaningful question and answer, and a counseling continuum. The team includes Personnel Director, Olita Williams, our Technical Director, Ms. Tennille, and my name is Prince, licensed counselor, founder in AccuCenter, 501c program here in Macon, Georgia. Also, our contributing individuals are Larry Brown and Ray Edwards. We, at times, discuss sensitive topics here, and the opinions expressed from our guest may not necessarily reflect our ideas as a podcast staff. So I want you to listen with discretion, listener discretion, please. Our focus is to implement three things, friends. Our desire here is to promote, implement forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing in the Church of God. So thanks for joining tonight. Want to do our part, individual basis, to see those things happen in the church. Want to introduce our guests. We have two tonight, and of course, our listening audience. You can chime in with chat, questions, or comments. Go to YouTube and type in Church of God in Macon, Georgia. You'll see Wounded Hearts, number 17 live chat. Our other guest, special guest tonight, is Tabitha Edwards Ward, a Church of God child. She's a mom and a wife, has 5 children, earned 2 bachelor's degrees, and she's an accountant. Sister Ward, if people want to contact you, how can they go about doing that?
They can do that via email at tabithadward@gmail.com, and that's TABITHADWARD@gmail.com.
Again, friends, thank you for listening thus far. Your questions, your contributions have been very good. Our listening audience is usually 150 during the week. We've been up to 800, but we're glad that you are there listening. I mentioned to you last week we had a pastor listening. He called his other friend pastor, and they got back together, and they're communicating and talking, reconciling, which is good. Awesome. 2 other groups have contacted me, vice versa, to begin reconciling. So again, we want to see that done in God's church. It'll give us strength. Mm-hmm. It'll be a blessing in the long run. So thanks again for listening even tonight. We have questions tonight for Sister Ward. We have some following questions from last week and from this week. Our first question is, explain the reason for your name, Tabitha Ward Edwards, if you would, please.
It's kind of easy, not really. My full name is Tabitha Dorcas Edwards Ward. When I was born, I stopped breathing, and they were not really certain if they could bring me back. And when I did come back and I was okay, there was no issues, my parents started searching out the Bible. And in Acts 9, there is a lady who was healed and brought back, and her name was Tabitha, and her Greek name was Dorcas. So my name comes from Acts 9 of Tabitha Dorcas.
Beautiful story. Sister Ward, we got to go back to last week. You said some very provocative things, and I was kind of shocked, really. But I want to get back. When you were asked to leave the school, what was the emotion that went with that? When you were asked to leave the school, your friends and all that, what went with that?
Devastation, hurt, guilt. Not really certain what the guilt was, but I had a guilt because, you don't ask people to leave the church unless they've done something wrong. And when everything ended, it brought up all those emotions: guilt, hurt, confusion, and self-doubt. Like, what did I do? Because there really wasn't anything in my 14-year-old mind I could think of that I had done. And it set the path for decisions that I made going forward. Because, when you have your life ripped from you, it makes you question a lot of things. Every decision I made, I had always made every decision in my life based upon the Church of God, because we were taught to get into heaven, you had to go to the Church of God. If you didn't go to the Church of God, um, you essentially were not going to heaven. You were not saved. And so when the school was just an extension of that, and when that was removed, it kind of just removed my whole construct of what my life was, what my life would be, what my future would be, even. So it was very devastating and very just, it messed with my psyche, because it just makes you question self-worth. It makes you doubt yourself. Um, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. um,
Wow.
Now I can look back on it now, and I can see how choices have put me in the place that I am now, but I can also see how the process from then to now has gotten me in a better place and brought me back to God. Because if you had asked me 3 years ago, 4 years ago, if I wanted to talk about that, there would still be moments I could not speak of the school incident. I could not speak of church. I could not even speak of the Church of God and some of the pastors without having this anger, not really anger, but just hurt and anger kind of balled into one. And it was hard not to express that, even though I knew that wasn't how I needed to be. I needed to have a peace about it and let God deal with it. So I had to get to a place that I could just give it to God and let him work me through coming to peace with that.
You mentioned seeing a counselor. Did that help verbalizing these things that you went through with the counselor?
It did. It did. And I still frequently see a counselor. And I know some people don't believe in counseling. I'm a firm believer in counseling, especially if you have one that is God based. I'm a firm believer in God based, because I have, in my attempt to find the perfect fit, because every therapist is not a perfect fit for everyone. Um, there was some that was kind of just like, well, you have to do what makes you feel good and this, and it's not that. We are put on earth and we have a soul that searches out God. And until you find a peace to come to terms with everything that has put you to the place that you are with God, it's hard to move forward and even discern what God's word is, because you're always questioning everything. So the therapist that I had, it was kind of like, I tell people all the time, it was like an onion, and she peeled back layer by layer and layer.
Mm.
And every time something would come up and I would be like, well, I can't do that because, I'm not part of the Church of God. And she would be like, but let's pull out the Bible. Let's read what the Bible says. Let's she was really big on journaling. Journal. Talk to God. Talk to him like he's your friend. Like it's a person, like I'm talking to you guys. And in that, it brought the onion back to the root, so you could replant it and regrow completely new and be at peace with everything. And that's not saying there's not still moments that I'm still dealing with things, because there are, but you get to the point where you realize it's okay to mourn the fact that you lost what you thought your future was going to be and how you thought it was going to be through the church. And it's okay to mourn that moment that kind of just obliterated your life in a split second. And it's okay to say, okay, that happened, but that wasn't God. That was a spirit that came in, that took over, that tried to present itself as God, but that wasn't God. But to get to that point, it took many, many, many therapy sessions and reading and praying. And I've gotten now where if I'm quiet, I'm usually talking to God. I do a lot of road trips to Texas. That's where my husband is. And usually if the kids have their headphones on or whatever they're doing, sleeping, usually I'm just like I'm having a dialogue with God, and I'm talking, and it's nice now to be where I can look at it And I have a friendship with him that I never thought was possible, because I honestly thought that day, well, I'm not part of the Church of God, so I'm condemned. I'm condemned. I'm going to hell. There's no other option, because I wasn't allowed to go back to the church at the time. I wasn't allowed to even visit. So it was, once I got past all of that, I was able to say, okay, what is God? Who is God? What is he to me? How do I go forward? Because like I said, our soul does it yearns for that relationship with God. And
Very
it
true.
we know when we don't have it that something's missing. But sometimes it takes time to figure out what it is, because we try to fill it up with things. And I think because of what happened, I tried to fill it up with, like, I married my high school boyfriend, and that relationship ended up being very, very toxic, and to the point that we had to run for our lives to live. And then I ended up meeting my current husband, and he was a godly based man. And the first thing he said was, we don't start things unless you believe in God. And that was the first time I had heard that. But that's what I needed, because he pushed me to delve into everything that had gotten me to the point that I didn't want to talk about God. And I didn't want to talk about church, even Church of God. I didn't want to hear it. So it made me seek out what it was my heart and soul was missing.
Any questions, Director, from the outside?
Yes. Miss Williams asks, did you find yourself being angry with your parents?
No, because they didn't have a say so either. It was a decision made by the ministry, that because my parents did not agree with something that the ministry said was important. Now I know, as I'm older and I've delved in it, it really wasn't important. And really what they were trying to say was coming straight from God was really man. It was a spirit trying to have that evil and greed just take over the congregation. So I never faulted my parents. If anything, I've told them numerous times, I'm glad that when everything went through this, they never hardened their heart towards God. And even though we were not in the Church of God that I grew up in, they still sought God, and they still put God first in our family. Even though myself and even my younger brother, we didn't want to talk about it for a while. We did not want to talk about it, but it was a thankfulness that they kept what mattered in life as the center of our life, even if we weren't involved. And even if at the time I could not accept that God, even though this wasn't God, I couldn't accept that that wasn't God at the moment. I'm thankful now that I'm older. I can look back, and as I've delved into everything and came to peace with things, I'm thankful that they did that, because it kept that seed in my heart that I knew at some point I had to reconcile with God. I had to.
Any more questions?
I do have one more question.
Okay.
Prince Damascus asked, was there a time before the break that you felt the church was wrong?
Yes. Yes. There was some significant events that happened at our church. And that's what led to our family being removed from the church. My parents and my siblings and I, as well as the people that they said. I mean, I remember standing at the pool, sitting in church next to my friend that I've been friends with since I was born, and the preacher speaking and saying, if you speak to them, you're speaking to snakes. They are beneath snakes that crawl on the earth. And as a 14-year-old, I'm sitting, I'm like, I'm just me trying to live as I'm supposed to. What are you talking about? So I never understood that. Now I do. But the church, there was things going on, and there was instances. So there was a change in ministry due to some really vile behavior. So there was a change in ministry. And then as a result of that, there was there was a lot of chaos around that time for like the 3 years right before it broke. So you could tell as a kid, even though I didn't understand it in its totality, I knew something was going on. And there was things that, I mean, we were being preached at from the pulpit, like, you can't sit with this person and you can't talk to this person and you can't be around this person. And that just kind of set odd, because these are people we've known, most of us children, we've known each other all of our lives. And now, it's being taught from the pulpit, well, you can't sit here and you can't do this and you can't associate with this and you can't. It brought up questions and made me think something's going on here. I didn't understand it at the time. I don't think I was old enough to. But there was definite moments. And as kids, we even talked about it. We're like, what is this? Like, we would see things and we didn't understand really what we were seeing, but we knew something wasn't right.
You mentioned last week about being shunned at the library and at the market. How did that make you feel as a child?
It made me feel like I was less than a person, like I was less than them. I was beneath them. It made me feel like dirt, to be honest. My brother and I had talked. He was actually visiting. He lives out of town now, and we were talking about it, and he had brought up a couple of other instances, and we talked about how it just, at that moment in time, we couldn't understand why our friends would turn their back on us. And it made us both look at each other and think, what was wrong with us? What did we do as a 11-year-old or a 13-year-old, no, 12-year-old and 14-year-old? What did we do that was so wrong? What did we do that made us these horrible, horrible people? And so then, like I said, the self-doubt and starts questioning, who are you? What is wrong with you that you're not even allowed to go back and associate, even talk to him if you see him in public? What is wrong with you? What did I do, and what is wrong with me?
Friends, I have a question for the viewing audience, for Sister Edwards also too. If we disagree on an idea, tradition, or moray, should we still be loving toward each other? Or should we just simply shun one another? What should we do if we disagree on an issue or maybe even a doctrine? Should we shun one another, turn our backs, or should we maintain that love between the two parties? What is your take on that, listening audience, and to Mrs. Sister Ward also too?
My belief that God is love doesn't change no matter what. When Jesus was on the cross, he looked at the ones beside him who were murderers, and he offered them forgiveness. And to me, loving someone does not mean that you're accepting something that you believe they're wrong. But if you love them, you're going to show them Christ's love, because if you believe they're wrong and you believe they're not living a holy life and a godly life, you're going to want to show them God's love so that they can find God, so that whatever you believe is not right, they can get right in their heart. And I'm a firm believer, we're all humans and we strive to be a mirror image of God. And along that path, we still are getting rid of self in that process. So there are moments when self is going to, well, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, so they're not right. But we still, if God has convicted us, it's our job to be a light for him and shine for him. So whether we agree on things or not, we're still supposed to be a reflection of him. Godly chastising someone, okay, but you still, if you want to bring them to God, you have to show them God's love and forgiveness and that there's hope in him.
You're talking to someone in our listening audience who has been hurt in the church or wounded. What would you say to that person at this point? What would be your counsel to them?
Every instance in our life impacts who we are, but we can't let it dictate how we react forever. We can't let it fester inside of us. We have to deal with it, because if you don't, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And there was things in my mind, because I put off dealing with it. Like, I was terrified to walk back into a church of God. I had this anxiety. I was like, if I walk back in, it's going to be this environment that's just going to be horrible. But you have to come to a place that you're willing to peel back the layers, go through the process of finding out who God really is, having a personal one-on-one relationship with God. I highly recommend therapy. I really do. I believe that it's great to just talk things out with another person. and it's easy to, when you find someone you can talk to, you can peel back everything. Okay, this impacted me. This made me think here. You have to deal with it, because you can't let it fester in you, because you're going to end up 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the line, and you're still going to be in that moment that happened to you 30 years ago. And you haven't lived life. You've just maintained and survived. So you have to recognize it. You have to come to terms with it's okay to be angry with it. It's okay to be sad about it. It's okay to hate that it happened. It's okay to do that. It's okay to mourn that it happened. But once you do that, then you have to take the steps forward of building back up that relationship with God. Because I firmly believe with God, you can build it up 100% and get back to that personal one-on-one relationship with him, where he's talking to you, he's guiding you. You know, when you take a step, if it's the right step, the wrong step, or if it's a step God's gonna be like, hold up, we need to come back, we need to readdress that.
Our time is just about gone. Another few moments. Talk about the process that you went through. The process.
I truly went through a phase of being angry at God, angry at the ministry, angry at the church, angry at myself. I didn't really know why I was angry, but angry at myself because I didn't do whatever it was I needed to do to make sure that I was still involved with that church, to the point that I got where it was like, okay, I need to work with this, because it's controlling how I react to things. There was people's names that could be brought up, and I would literally just get angry, like just angry.
Wow.
So I had to get to the point where I'm like, okay, let me make peace with this that happened. Let me acknowledge it happened. Let me acknowledge the pain it caused and the confusion and the hurt, and then go forward. As far as all the ministers, I've forgiven them all. Do I trust all of them? There are some I don't know that I will ever get back unless God puts it in me. I don't know that there would be a trust that I could have in them as a person, just because there were some vile things. But I've forgiven them, and in forgiving them, it's not, the forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you to be able to put that to rest and move to the next level, where once you get peace with that, then you start finding out who God is, what God is, and realize that once you've gone through all the process of making peace with the hurt and the turmoil and the chaos, it's really peaceful when you have that one-on-one relationship with God. And that's what matters, because once you have that one-on-one relationship with God, he gives you discernment where you can find, I mean, I've went places and it seemed like it was great, but there was that spirit, and God's like, we need to be careful of that. That's not a spirit that's good. And he places you and gives you the discernment to place you in places that you're in a godly environment that will help you move along in your path to rebuilding that one-on-one relationship with God, because that's what matters, is that one-on-one personal relationship with God that we all have to have.
Another question from the outside.
Yes, Tabitha, this is a question from a church hurt soul. And it says, some are hurt and seem to want to tear up the church and its influence. How do I get out of this group?
That's a heavy question, isn't it?
Very.
That's a very heavy question. It's not as simple of you wake up one day and it's like, okay, everything's great. I was part of a group of children of the Church of God. And we just kind of had, as I like to call it, word vomit. We kind of just said, this is what happened to me. This is how it impacted me. And then other people would talk, and it was kind of like we just kind of just threw it all out there and was like, okay, where do we go from here? It's like I said, it's not an overnight thing. It's not an overnight process, but I firmly believe when you make peace with it, because there are people, I personally know people that have went through the chaos and the discord and the division, and they don't want to talk about God because they still connotate what happened with God. And it takes a while to get to the place that you understand the division is not God. That's not God's heart, soul. That's not a God spirit. So once you get to that point, then you can move forward. But it takes love and prayer, lots of prayer. I always tell people pray. If you know someone's hurting and you know that the chaos and division has divided them, and sorry, I get emotional because I can think of people right now that I talk to regularly, and I want them to make it to heaven. I want them to have the peace that I know they can have with God. But I know they're on their journey, and it's taken them. I mean, I'll use my brother for an example. 5 years ago, my brother would not let you talk about God, period. Would not. He's to the point now that he accepts that God exists and that God is good and that God loves us. But he's on his path. He's on his process of getting to the point that he can. And it's taken me, 25 years. I'm finally to the point. 6 months ago, I walked into a Church of God for the first time.
Wow.
I'm not going to say it was easy. The night before I threw up, I was so anxious. But I walked in and there was a spirit from the spirit of the message. You felt God. But it was going to I had to make peace with what happened that destroyed me at that age of 14 before I could even get to the point that I would even think of, okay, I'm okay with going to the Church of God. Now, granted, my dad did push me a little. He can be very persuasive, but I don't regret it. And I'm thankful every day that I did because it helped me close another door. Okay, not every Church of God is like the Church of God I grew up in. Not every Church of God has that spirit. That spirit is an ungodly, divisive spirit that the devil, he's the mastermind of, because if he can twist our mind and make us think that God is evil, then he's won. But I had to come to peace with that and realize that wasn't God. And like I said, it took prayer and counseling and reading my Bible, just one-on-one, me reading my Bible. And I had a pastor here locally who I would call and I'm like, look, I thought I was taught this growing up, but I'm reading the Bible and it's contradictory to what I was taught. And we would walk through and he never was, this is how it has to be. It was, let's consult God. Let's see what God guides. Let's follow God's word. And when you do that, there's a peace about it that starts chipping away those little pieces of ice that have built around your heart and makes it where you can get to the place that you're at peace with God and you realize the church. Yes, the Church of God is a building some places, but the church is us. And if we're followers of Christ together, we are the church of God. We are the followers of God. And when you get to that point and you realize that there's this peace that I can't explain it other than it's a peace and it brings you peace and you can look back and you're like, that was really bad. That was horrible. But look at where it's brought me and look at the path that I'm on now. And I'm thankful for it. As crazy as that sounds, I'm thankful for that because it's given me a insight that I would not have otherwise. And it allows me to talk to people in a way that I wouldn't understand. And I probably would have still been doing that face worship, I guess, because it wasn't really an in-depth personal relationship with God, because I associated saved with being in a church, not the relationship with God that you have to have, which is what matters in the end.
Our time is gone. Sister Edwards, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
This podcast is for the Church of God, by Church of God. We've all been affected to an extent by this division that's been happening since day one almost. But we do want to find ways to implement, reach out, reconcile, forgive, and produce that healing that is so very much needed. We want to push the envelope and do our part to do that. I want to thank our listeners tonight for texting in, and of course our staff, Sister Tennille, Sister Lolita, and of course our contributors, Larry Brown, Ray Edwards, and our special guest. Let me be clear. Tabitha is in Church of God now with her husband and family when she's in town, and she's going back to seek. And that's a blessing. We want you to know that if you've been wounded and hurt, let God guide you.
Yes.
And he will protect you and help you to forgive and to reconcile and heal. That's what we're all about here. May the Lord bless you. Have a good day. Bye.
Amen.